Welcome to the Intentional Household podcast, where we talk about systems, tools, and mindsets to help families thrive both at home and in life. I am Laura Wilson. Today, we're diving into a topic that I feel is so important, but often overlooked. We are talking about estate planning. And it's not just about wills and documents. It's about protecting your loved ones and making sure your wishes are clear when it matters most, and also making sure you are set up for success if the time comes when you are in a position of being named an executor and you have to take on that role. To help us unpack this, I am thrilled to welcome Cheryl Maloney to this episode. Cheryl is a Certified Executor Advisor, and she brings not only expertise, but a calm, compassionate approach to what can feel like an overwhelming process. She's here to help us understand how to create a simple, effective estate plan for your family, no matter what stage of life you are in. Cheryl, thank you so much for joining us. And to start off, can you tell us exactly what a Certified Executor Advisor is and how you got into this line of work?
Thank you so much, Laura, for having me on your podcast today. To start off, a Certified Executor Advisor is a professional designation that demonstrates specialized knowledge in helping executors. So those are the people, the individuals responsible for settling estates. And it helps them navigate the complex process of estate administration. We call ourselves CEAs for short, and CEAs provide guidance and expertise to executors, helping them understand their responsibilities, identify any potential issues, and connect with necessary professional services. We don't act as executors ourselves, but rather offer advice and direction to executors. We also work with the testators. And for those of you that don't know that term, testator is the person whose will it is. So think of the term last will and testament. Testator is the person who makes the will. And in other words, what we really want to do with the testators is to ensure that their estates are well prepared, so not to be a burden on their executors. And CEAs can offer tremendous value here.
So how did you get into this, Cheryl?
Well, I kind of fell into it by accident, actually. It was really for personal reasons. It was about a decade ago that someone in my immediate family had a big health scare. And it was really alarming because I thought, oh my gosh, my role as executor, because I was executor for this person, might start way sooner than I had ever imagined. And now, luckily, it didn't. My family member did recover, but it was a real wake-up call for me. And it really crystallized for me the importance of preparedness when it comes to the future of our parents. All too often, we think, our parents are going to be around for a long time, and we think we have lots of time. But you have lots of time until you don't. And none of us know when that time's going to be. So I completed my CEA designation really for my own personal knowledge, but I realized that I'm not alone. There are probably thousands and thousands of well-intended yet unprepared families out there who have a profound need to get their affairs in order.
I think when people hear the word estate, they picture a mansion or they just picture someone who has millions of dollars. So can you explain what an estate actually is?
Estate does have that connotation. You think of lots of money, you think of mansion. But the term estate it's actually a legal term for all the money, property, and personal items, less debts, a person owns up until the moment they pass away. It essentially encompasses a deceased person's net worth, regardless of how small or how large. It could be $500, $500,000, $500 million. It's all an estate.
So for our listeners, especially parents who are managing busy households, why is this conversation relevant to them, even if they don't consider themselves wealthy?
Well, I guess the fact is that every family leaves something behind, whether it's a financial value or of emotional value. And yes, there are disputes over money when it comes to settling an estate, but there are just as many disputes over small items that have particular sentimental value, and it's those disputes that can't be reconciled effectively in a court of law. And those are the wounds that never heal in families. So it's important to get things set up ahead of time. And a will is not just about assets. And for younger families in particular, a will also allows you to list guardians for your children. So should something happen to you, So very important for people with minor children, so under the age of 18, to have a will, if only for that.
Let's talk about the executor. Who typically ends up in that role? And can you talk about the responsibilities that they have to take on?
Absolutely. What's interesting in Canada is there's a stat that I quote in my presentations. To think of it this way, 92% of Canadians over the age of 45 plan on asking a family member or a close friend to be their executor. So that's a lot of people who have zero experience in this role, and they're taking on being an executor. So for a lot of family members to take on that role of executor, the majority, as I said, of these people really have no experience. You can't practice being an executor, right? You just start when the time comes. And they dive in, give it their best effort when the time comes for the role to start. But unfortunately, the nature of the role doesn't lend itself to trial and error. The beneficiaries, the courts that stand behind them have an expectation that that executor will excel in their role. And an executor, by definition, is what we call a fiduciary role. And what a fiduciary is it's a person who's held to a higher standard of conduct and care because they're managing and distributing property that belongs to another person. When you put it together, an executor role is very time consuming, and it could include up to, say, 100 plus tasks. And some of the responsibilities include, and starting with, arranging the funeral. We never really think about that as an executor role, but that is the executor's responsibility. And because those lines are blurred between family and executor, a lot of times we don't realize that it's the executor that makes those choices, or should, rather than just any family member. They also have to go to the court and apply for what we call probate. They have to protect and manage assets of the estate. They have to make sure all the assets that are in the will can be located, right? That could be a bad day if something's missing. They have to share all the information about what's in the will with the beneficiaries. They settle any debts. They have to communicate with beneficiaries, submit tax returns, submit a list of assets to the court. Like, the list goes on. And then in the end, distribute all the assets to the rightful beneficiaries.
So one thing that really stood out to me was you were saying a lot of executors, they don't have experience being an executor. But even before that, when they are named executor, and say it is communicated to that person, hey, I named you as executor in my will, they don't even know what they're signing up for. And so they're like, yeah, okay, of course, I'm your family member. I'm your daughter. I will do that. But they have no idea what is involved. So I think about myself. I am busy. I have 3 kids and I run the household and I work as well. I mean, not only is this valuable for my own estate, but if I had to take this role on, if something were to happen to, say, my mom, that is a huge job. And this is, you said it could involve 100 or more tasks, right? This seems like it would be a full-time job for a period of time. Mm-hmm. And so that I could see adds a lot of stress. And that is if it's set up properly, right? It might not even be set up properly. And then you're adding all of those factors, which can be a really stressful job. Mm-hmm. It sounds like very daunting and makes me want to leave here and talk to my mom and make sure she is set up properly so that I can carry out the role as seamlessly as possible. Do you feel stuck in a cycle of daily tasks with no time for what truly matters? At Intentional Household, we provide a holistic solution to your household challenges. Our unique process identifies inefficiencies and transforms them into opportunities for growth and peace of mind. It's time to live intentionally. Visit intentionalhousehold.com to learn more.
Estate planning would be so much easier if we knew when that role was going to start.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Think of those futuristic movies where you had a date stamped on your arm and that's when you were going to die. We don't have that. So we don't know when that role will start. So that's the thing. It is very time consuming. An average estate takes about, I think this survey in 2021 said 570 hours to complete. So if you put that into full-time work days, that's like 76 days of 7.5 hour days to get an estate settled. And that's just an average estate. That's why I work with the testators really more so than the executors, because it's their estate they're leaving to somebody else. and make sure that you set your executor up for success.
Yes.
Imagine walking in, even for myself, walking into my parents' household. Oh, I know where they bank. I don't know how many bank accounts they have.
No,
I've
I'm sure
never
you
met
don't.
their investment advisor. I don't know who did their will, who their lawyer is. All these pieces of information that I'm going to have to deal with that I don't know.
No.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. You have to do so many other things. Think of canceling every credit card, bank account, social media, you name it, online accounts, all those things. And if you don't make your executor walk into your home and be Sherlock Holmes, right? It's not fair to them. When we talk about that, there was another poll done. It's a little bit dated, but it was a BMO Leger poll that said that when they actually polled over 1,000 active executors and said, how are you doing in your role so far? Well, 47% of them were having administration difficulties. 31% were having emotional issues. And over a quarter of them, 26%, were having legal issues.
I want to go over what some of these issues are. So starting with administrative issues, what could some of those be?
Administrative issues could be things like locating assets and bank accounts, filing court documents and taxes, communicating with beneficiaries. And then, for example, legal issues could be, taking care of lawyers' letters, demand notices, or even getting sued by beneficiaries.
Wow. And then emotional issues. I heard that 1 in 3 families are destroyed by settling estates. We always hear about families having issues, but that stat seems really high. Is that true?
It is. And unlike the administration and legal issues that you probably will be able to overcome, it's the emotional scars that never heal.
Yeah.
And we think about, well, why is that? Well, it's because the only person who can bring the family back together is usually that matriarch or patriarch who has just passed away. And it's their estate that are ripping open these wounds. And I can tell you, have you ever met a family who's fought over an estate ever come back together again?
Yeah.
It doesn't happen.
And I'm sure it can also bring resentment toward the person who passed as well, right? So not only are you having issues with your family members who have survived, but then maybe you're thinking, oh, if only they had done this, or why would they put me in this situation, or what were they thinking?
And that's where the number one word to remember from this whole conversation is communication.
Yes.
When I think to my parents' age, they're in their 80s, it was taboo to talk about what's in your will. That's like, oh, no, we don't want to read it. I remember when I first got my parents' will, I said, yes, thank you. It's an honor to be your executor. I wouldn't know if I would say that now.
Right.
But I took the will, didn't even take it out of the envelope and put it in the back of the filing drawer because I thought it was rude to read it. But what if I had a question? And if they're passed away, they can't answer. So a lot of the times the strife that happens between the surviving family members is because they can't get clarity from that person who passed away.
Yeah.
So it's important to sit down and discuss your estate plan because if there are questions, you can answer them.
Yeah. And rather than be, okay, surprise.
Yeah.
And, another thing I want to talk about for executors, and sometimes there are co-executors because there may be 2 or 3 kids. I have 2 siblings, so there is a chance that we could be co-executors. But this role, it requires some skill and strengths. I can just see between my siblings, we have different strengths. And so just because we are all the offspring, let's say to my mom, there may be one person who actually is more suited toward this role. And I'm just thinking, if we take it back to the Colby and someone who's really good with details and facts and following through and bringing closure. I mean, unfortunately, that's me. But that type of person would be great in this role. Not saying they want to take it on, but I'm saying they would be more effective in completing this rather than if I'm just thinking of, let's say, someone else who doesn't pay attention to detail and they're like quite scattered and they have a really hard time bringing closure. This can be even more draining, this role to them. So you really want to be mindful of who you choose and not just because they are your kids.
That's right. And so you think of it this way, every family is unique, every family is different. And you really have to assess the strengths of those family members. And sure, maybe there are 3 kids and maybe 3 of them together would be a great choice, depending how they work together. And do they get along? Are they good communicators? If there's one person who's for lack of better term, say very emotional and is going to be so grief-stricken and won't be able to focus and won't be able to do this job, then they're not a good choice for executor. It doesn't mean you don't love them as much. It just means they're not suited for the job.
Yeah.
And you really have to take that into consideration when you're determining who should be your executor.
Mm-hmm. And it's not about being fair.
As they say, fair isn't always equal and equal isn't always fair.
Mm-hmm. It's really about who can rise to the challenge, if you will, and live up to this role.
When you also think about it too, you could have someone who checks all the boxes, would be a perfect executor. But what if they work 80 hours a week? They can't fit that in. So they're not a good choice. Or they live in another country, not a good choice. So all these things come into play.
Yeah, it does. And I suppose when someone is asking you, and people aren't even always asked,
No,
right? They are
sometimes
just assigned.
it's a surprise.
A surprise. But if you do have, say, the opportunity, if you will, to be asked, you really want to put some thought through before you make your decision, because you may, again, not know what you're getting yourself into and really not have the capacity to take this on.
Right.
So I know that you have a very thoughtful 4-step process to help families prepare. Can we walk through that process?
Absolutely. And I guess the first thing we start with is when I think about people, they don't know where to start. So our first step is what I call an estate risk assessment. This is where, we ask questions that focus on 3 different areas: emotional, financial, and communication dynamics. So that's all about your family and how do they get along. And the analysis of this assessment helps us identify any areas in the estate that still need addressing and could pose a threat to the executor. So we're all about setting the executor up for success. So what are some of the red flags that are going to come out? An example of this could be, maybe we'll discover there's more planning within a family business. Maybe the succession plan isn't set out properly. Is there missing documentation? How often do we loan money to children to buy a home? And is it a loan? Is it a gift? And if not, is it documented, right? A lot of fights start over that. And with blended families, is there privacy or discretion concerns? How should we settle that? How should we set that up now to keep family harmony down the road? So that's step 1. The second step for us is I help clients compile a detailed identification and documentation of all their property, assets, financial and personal information. So remember when I said, don't make your executor be Sherlock Holmes? This is what's going to help them. It's going to be all put together nicely so that they work from this. I call it an executor roadmap, right? And it's their key source. Right?
Yes.
So they have everything at their fingertips.
Okay. Yes. I love the sound of this.
Yeah. And then the third thing we'll do is we can sit down and discuss mitigation and program construction of your legacy. So what if we identify some planning needs that still need to be done? Maybe there's insurance needs to provide liquidity for taxation or for equalization of the estate that might be required. And we also work with your trusted professionals to ensure that all parties understand the plan and avoid any unintended consequences. And I'll just share a quick example of an unintended consequence. There was a gentleman who was divorced and had a very successful private business, and his son worked with him in the business. So he left the shares in the corporation to his son and the cash holdings in his estate to his daughter, figuring they are of equal value. So what happened is, because he didn't share this information with his accountant and his other advisors, just the lawyer saying, draw up my will this way, the lawyer did what he was asked. So when the gentleman passed away, because the shares passed from one generation to the next, there was no spousal transfer, it created a big tax bill. So guess where the tax was paid? From the cash in the estate. So the son walked away with a company, no tax liability, and the daughter walked away with the scraps left in the bank account. So when that brother says to his sister, well, that's what dad wanted, isn't it? How do you think those two are getting along? And that's because dad didn't talk to his accountant, and the accountant would have pointed out, wait a minute, you're going to have a big tax liability. Where are you funding that from? This is why we look at everything to make sure we haven't missed something.
Yeah. He followed in that. It was like a DIY.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then our fourth step in our process is to have that executor family meeting. This meeting allows your executor and key family members to have an overview in advance of your estate plan and their future roles in that plan.
Mm-hmm.
What's really key here is at a time when they're not yet grieving your loss.
Okay. Yeah.
You're still around,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it gives them the opportunity to ask you questions if there's not any clarity. If they need more clarity or they don't understand something, when you're passed away, you can't provide that answer.
Wow. I just think about how many people or how few people probably have this meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, this sounds like it is a critical step so that you can get an overview, ask questions, get clarity. And it's just not happening at all.
Yeah. And when you think of siblings, everyone has their own perception of reality. So let's say there were 3 kids in a family and one of them years ago went through a very nasty divorce and mom and dad helped them out financially. Well, what if it said in mom and dad's will that this one sibling was receiving less of an inheritance than the other 2 siblings? They might forget the fact that mom and dad helped them out years ago, and that's why they're left in a little bit of a diminished capacity when it comes to their inheritance. But they wouldn't think that way. Mom and dad, if they're not around to say, oh, the reason we're leaving less to you is because years ago we helped you out, there's clarity.
Yeah.
But without asking or without saying that, stating that beforehand, they might not remember.
Are you tired of piecing together help for your home only to find the solutions don't work together? At Intentional Household, we go beyond one-off fixes. We examine every aspect of your household and create a customized structure that ensures everything, from childcare to maintenance, works together seamlessly. Discover the difference at intentionalhousehold.com. Can we talk about why it is important to create a plan?
I've had a lot of people come up to me and they've gone to a seminar where we talk about executor success and they go, yes, I have to do something. And then they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And then a year later, they may give me a call and say, oh my gosh, can you help me now? Mom's passed away.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what you have to understand is planning can happen when a person's alive. But once they've passed away, there's no more planning. The line is drawn in the sand. And it's about letting the chips fall where they may. You're dealing with what happened in that point in time. You can't plan anymore.
No, you
right?
can't.
You have to execute. And in some cases, it is the government and courts that will decide what's in the best interest of the estate, regardless of circumstance. So if you didn't have a plan in place, then maybe the courts have to step in and help. So for example, dying without a will. If you die intestate, then it's not your choice where your estate is distributed. There's a provincial formula that the courts follow. A lack of planning really hurts a deceased person's legacy, but moreover, a lack of planning and preparation is the worst gift you could leave your executor. As I said before, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
And this is a really tough one because if you haven't had the conversation with your own parents and they say everything is in place, it's really trusting their word that it is in place. Everyone pays attention to detail differently and they plan differently. And so what I may envision as having everything in place could be very different than, let's just say, what my mom has planned. And so really being able to see this plan in advance would be really helpful so that I have the opportunity to see the roadmap and answer any questions that I have.
Mm-hmm. And you're right about everyone having a different perception of planning.
Mm-hmm.
I had one client say to me, his son, he named his son as his executor who lived a plane ride away. I said, have you put everything together? He says, well, he'll just see all the statements that come in the mail over a month. And I thought, well, this guy lives a plane ride away. Is he going to sit in your house for a month and wait for all the statements to come in to know what you have? So that was his idea of being prepared. But that's not what I'd call being prepared. His son would again have to be that Sherlock Holmes and figure it out.
And you referenced the roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what that actually is?
Absolutely. So when I talk about a roadmap, what I think you need to put in there, starting, of course, with the obvious, your will, your powers of attorney for property and for health. If there's any marriage or cohabitation agreement, that should go in there. Those are the go-tos. But if you want your executor to be successful, then you need to include a list of all your assets. What properties do you own? How many cars? Like everything that they're going to have to report, in particular in Ontario, where we have to do this, provide a list of assets to the government. What do you own? Put that in there. And then, of course, all your key contact information. Who's your financial advisor? Who's your real estate broker? Who's your lawyer? Who's your accountant? They need to get a hold of these people. And if they haven't met them, how are they going to figure that out? All your accounts, how many investment accounts you have, bank accounts, credit cards, open your wallet, and everything they're going to have to cancel, you need to record for them.
So in what format is this? Are we talking about, is this on your computer? Is this a physical document? How are people storing this?
So because most testators are older, they're more comfortable with a physical binder.
Okay.
If you are doing it digitally, do not save it on your computer. What if you're hacked? It's everything about you, everything about you. So you have to be very careful where you store that. So I'm just going to make that known right there.
And I guess one other thing I want to say is if it's on your computer, it means that the family member has to be able to access.
Right. Do they even know your password to get in there? So even things like that, password to get in your computer, something as simple as that.
Okay.
So things like that, I put that all in a binder. Also, one thing we didn't mention is if the executor has to plan your funeral, what do you want for your final wishes, or celebration of life? They're going to be grieving your loss. If they're related to you or one of your best friends, they're going to be grieving your loss. So don't make them make decisions along the way. Make them follow your instructions. So you've already laid it out. They're just implementing what you've chosen. A lot easier on them.
Got it. Okay. So they're almost planning it themselves and you're just implementing it like you're saying. Okay.
Exactly.
I love that. I love how aligned this is with running your household like an organization, because it's really, if I don't have the skills, or let's just say we were an organization and I needed, well, let's just say marketing, right? If I needed someone to help with marketing, am I going to try to take the time to learn it myself, or am I going to outsource it to someone who is skilled?
Right.
And especially with something like this, it's so critical to use someone who has the knowledge and the training to ensure it is done properly, rather than the DIY method where you could skip so many steps and then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
It's too late.
Yeah. I would say it's really about relieving future burdens through present clarity. And plans are fluid and change over time, for example, with every major life event. But the key is to get something in place now so you have protection for your family. You can tweak things along the way.
So like we had mentioned, this can be very overwhelming for people who want to get started. But I'm already motivated to take action, or just to make sure everything is in place. So for listeners who want to get started or are starting to think about this for themselves or their parents or loved ones, what are the top things every household should have prepared?
Okay, so let's go back to that roadmap that's in that binder. So definitely the top three are, you have to have a will, because that's where you determine where your property is distributed, and you can name guardians for any minor children. Your power of attorney for financial matters and for health. An example is you can have a healthcare directive. If there's certain things that you don't want to have happen to you, then say that. If there's a do not resuscitate or things like that, you can spell that out so people can follow that, right? They don't have to guess what you would have wanted. And then we get into what's really going to help the executor is your contact list of your advisors, paperwork for any outstanding loans. Remember, I mentioned a lot of times we give money to our kids for a house. Really, you need to specify, was that a gift or is that a loan that needs to be paid back? Because the executor will have to collect that loan if it is a loan, because the executor has to act in the best interest of all the beneficiaries, not just one. So if they're unsure if that, for example, is a loan, they will have to get that money back and then distribute it amongst all the beneficiaries. So make sure your wishes are known. And of course, like I said, your funeral or celebration of life wishes, what do you want? And again, digital logins, credit cards, you name it, everything like that has to go in there. That's what you're doing above and beyond to make sure that your executor is successful.
Okay, wow. This is a lot to get started on. It can definitely feel overwhelming, I would say.
Yeah.
Where would you even suggest starting, or how?
Let's go with that saying, you don't know what you don't know. And that's what people feel like when they go into this. I don't know where to start. I don't know what I should put into this plan. So for those people who do feel overwhelmed or don't know where to start, I recommend starting with that estate risk assessment.
Okay.
General questions, That's where we find those red flags that draw out areas like, we still need to look at this. There could be a potential issue here. And that's something I can help with. I sit down with people, whether it's virtual or in person, and it takes approximately 2 hours to go through these questions. It's a great starting point. It leads into all sorts of conversations. Like no conversation is the same. Every family's different, as I said. But it's not just for older people. When you think of people in their 80s, it's also good for young families as it can uncover things that should be put into place now while they're young, and that'll draw attention to that. So it's great for any age.
Yeah. Every time I go on a plane, I think about how I need to update my will.
Yeah.
And then the trip ends and I don't think about it until the next one. Do you feel like you're managing your home is harder than managing your job? You're not alone. Many successful professionals struggle with household inefficiencies. At Intentional Household, we address these challenges head on, helping you reclaim your time and energy. Let us help you build a home that supports your goals. Visit intentionalhousehold.com today. What would you say is the biggest piece of advice for families who want to live and leave a more intentional legacy?
We talked about planning. Planning is really a gift for your loved ones. Don't let this topic overwhelm you. Break it down into bite-sized pieces. Like the saying goes, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. As I said, the easiest way to tackle this is to work with someone who can guide you through that process of preparation. 95% of the resistance to get started comes from not knowing what to do and how to put it together. So that's where someone like myself comes in. It's far easier to put a plan into place when someone is directing you on what needs to be in the plan and where to find that information. And Laura, just like in your business, we minimize the running around and the not knowing what to address. Otherwise, without having the proper direction, people would waste valuable time and, more importantly, emotional energy.
I have one last question before we wrap up, and it goes back to the roadmap. How often would you suggest individuals update it or revisit it?
For sure, after a major life event. If
Okay.
something happens and maybe somebody passed away in your family that was listed in your will, then maybe you have to update your will. So I have an elderly woman I'm working with right now who had her daughter listed as her power of attorney and one of her main beneficiaries, but she passed away. So now she has to revamp that.
Okay.
Right. Other things. So, it doesn't have to be every year, but every couple of years, let's say you change credit cards. Okay. That one's off. And I have this new one,
wow.
things like that.
Okay.
So when there's changes, just put it in your calendar to take a look at, spend an hour, once a year
Okay.
looking at that. And you might not have to change anything,
Mhm.
but you might discover things that do need changing.
Okay. That sounds great. So if anyone wants to find you, if they want to learn more about you and your services, or they want to learn more about working with a certified executor advisor, where can they find you?
I work for a company called Caldwell Securities, and you can find me there. My email is cmaloney@caldwellsecurities.com. So just reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to have a conversation.
Cheryl, thank you so much for joining us today. This conversation is such an important reminder that estate planning isn't just about money. It's about peace of mind, clarity, and care. Now, we have created a tool that can help families. We love the tools. So we have a free resource that people can download, 10 essentials every household should document for peace of mind. So you can check it out in the bottom of this podcast, and it will be on our website. For Cheryl's contact information, check it out below as well, and follow us at Intentional Household for more ways to live and plan with intention.
Laura, if I can leave you with one last comment on this whole topic, the biggest determinant of successful estate administration is how well you communicate with your executor, your beneficiaries, and your trusted advisors while you are still living.
It always comes back to communication.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you, Laura.